A multi-week military campaign against Iran may begin as early as Sunday. For now, the deployment is more or less complete. Only the aircraft carrier strike group around the Gerald R. Ford will need about 2 more days to be off the coast of Israel, from where it can intervene. Trump is using this delay to give Iran a final chance with an ultimatum to back down before the military strike takes place. In this video, we want to discuss what's happening on the ground, what the military strike will look like, and how Iran can defend itself. All of that here in this video. Holy smokes!
Now save the most at holy with my code.
Trump explicitly warns Iran to take the chance to make another deal, to reach another agreement. He says that Iran has 10 to 15 days left to do so. This is happening while the deployment is practically complete. We haven't seen any significant redeployments of fighter jets in the last 24 hours. That means everything the Americans wanted to have on site now seems to be there. By Sunday at the latest, the second aircraft carrier will also be available, which will probably be off the coast of Israel, the Gerald R. Ford. However, if this aircraft carrier strike group is redeployed to the Gulf of Oman, it would take about another week. Of course, it would have to pass through the Suez Canal, then the Red Sea, and move into the Indian Ocean. That would roughly take about a week, and that would fit surprisingly well with the ultimatum, which could expire in about 10 days. However, there are now reports again of new mass demonstrations, where the death of the spiritual leader of the dictator, Ali Khamenei, is being demanded. I can't currently verify whether they are correct, whether these are current recordings, but at least there are more and more reports that after the 40-day mourning period has ended, I've addressed this in the last videos here, that after it ends, the demonstrations are starting to grow again, and, understandably, the discontent hasn't disappeared. If the Iranian government responds to these demonstrations again with heavy violence, of course, an intervention by the Americans would be expected much more quickly, because now the Americans are more or less ready to intervene. So a diplomatic solution is still theoretically possible for the moment, but it is not very promising because the absolute minimum that Trump would be willing to accept, at least according to his own statements, would be a complete abandonment of the nuclear program. Officially, he is also demanding a massive restriction of the missile program. In addition, he wants a stop to the support of proxy units, meaning the terrorist organizations Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, as well as the Shiite militias, for example in Iraq. For Iran, all of that is actually out of the question. At most, a temporary restriction of enrichment would be conceivable, meaning that for a few years they would only enrich up to 3.6%, but the entire enrichment program would still be maintained. Completely giving it up, dismantling everything, handing over all enriched material is absolutely out of the question for Iran. This is emphasized again and again. In exchange for a temporary reduction of enrichment, they want all sanctions to be lifted. So effectively, this would be a huge victory for the regime. It would stabilize it, and at the same time, it wouldn't stop its path to the atomic bomb, but would only freeze it for a few years. The missiles and the proxies are not even up for discussion, because we have to be clear. They are, of course, the reason negotiations are happening in the first place. Is it only because these two things exist that the Americans are negotiating at all? And not attacking without talking first? So a diplomatic solution is unlikely, while war is likely. And the recently announced exercise with Russia and China, where the naval forces of the three countries will train together, won't change that either. Because we have to be clear. Iran will not dare to fire at the United States from the formation with the Russian and Chinese warships. The United States will also avoid firing into a fleet formation with neutral ships. So effectively, this exercise will at most protect the Iranian ships that are involved, but it won't have any real impact. So, as I said, the deployment is largely complete, and we have impressive numbers of equipment that have arrived. So, 48 F-16s have arrived, including probably 24 in the Wild Weasel configuration for combating enemy air defenses. There are 12 F-16s and 22 Raptor air superiority fighters that have arrived, making sure that nothing from Iran will be flying for long. Thanks to its stealth capabilities, the F-22 can also operate largely unimpeded over Iran, practically wherever it wants. In addition, there are 30 F-35A stealth multi-role aircraft which are well suited for air superiority and precision strikes, along with another 36 F-15E Strike Eagle heavy multi-role aircraft, which are excellent for both air superiority and precision bombing missions. Another 12-12 Thunderbolt. 2 ground attack aircraft are added. These will be ideal for countering attack drones in the event of large waves of Iranian attack drones, as they can fly for a long time and carry a large weapons load, making them capable of shooting down many of them. If necessary, however, they can also be used to combat the small Iranian speedboats in the Strait of Hormuz, to close the Strait of Hormuz. In addition, 6 EA-10G Growlers have been added, which were recently deployed. These are electronic warfare aircraft, used to jam and destroy enemy radar and air defense positions. Another 10 to 12 aircraft of this type are on board the 2 aircraft carriers. In addition, there are 10 to 12 F-35Cs on the aircraft carriers, as well as 70 to 84 FA-18EF Super Hornets. So, an incredible air force with attack drones added to it. 8 to 10 E-2D Hawkeyes, which are reconnaissance aircraft, basically small airborne warning and control system for aircraft carriers, are on both carriers. But not only those, the Americans have also deployed a proud 6 E-3 grams Sentry airborne warning and control system to the Middle East, along with 5 more E-11 A Battlefield Airborne Communications Node, Battlefield Airborne Communications Nodes. A total of 5 of those have been deployed on site. In addition, there are at least 8 to 13 MQ-4C reconnaissance drones, as well as several P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft. These will of course be used to monitor the Iranian Navy and to keep watch, for example, on whether Iran is mining the Strait of Hormuz. There's also an reconnaissance 135V Rivet Joint, a reconnaissance aircraft for electronic communications, as well as a U-2S Dragon Lady, which is also a reconnaissance aircraft. There are 107 tanker aircraft on site in Europe and along the route. They have been pre-positioned to support United States bombers, because the attack would not only be carried out with the B-2 like last time, but this time almost certainly also with the B-52 and possibly the B-1. They all require in-air refueling when operating from the United States. As a result, there are far more tankers along the route than during Operation Midnight Hammer. That means we can assume that not only the B-2 will be used, but also the B-52 and possibly the B-1, which will also operate from the United States to participate in airstrikes. In addition, there are various C-130 types that are capable of refueling and are also used for combat search and rescue. Also, combat search and rescue, to rescue downed American pilots even from inside Iran itself. This long list adds up to over 250 modern combat aircraft, plus about the same number of support aircraft on site. This is one of the largest air forces in the world. Most nations have less powerful air forces as a whole. And this has now been assembled just against Iran. And as I said, there are also the bombers that will fly in directly from the United States. And overall, we must not forget the ships that are still on site, because overall, there are still numerous surface ships and some submarines on site, which can probably deploy over 600 cruise missiles. So, against Iran, there has been an incredible deployment here, concentrating a massive military force against Iran. Things are going to get tough for the Iranian leadership if their whereabouts are known, and that's why all these weapons personally threaten them, even though they could easily conceal their location. With a VPN from today's sponsor, they can do that too and prevent Donald Trump from firing Tomahawk cruise missiles at them.
When researching for videos, I often have to access websites that block parts of the world based on their IP address, or let's say, are a bit questionable. That's where I absolutely need a VPN. With CyberGhost VPN, today's sponsor, I can not only access such websites encrypted and without logs, but also bypass the geo-blocking of 40 different streaming services. With just 2 clicks, you can select one of the 100 countries that CyberGhost offers to unlock content blocked in your region. That's also true in the United Kingdom, which is why I can use CyberGhost to access top British Broadcasting Corporation documentaries. Of course, no logs are kept, so no one can track which sites you visited. With CyberGhost, all your online activity is fully encrypted, so you basically enjoy complete privacy on the internet. With one subscription, I can connect 7 different devices, including my smart television and phone. Friends and family are allowed to use it too. The software is very user-friendly and works on all major platforms without any technical knowledge required. If any problems do occur, support is available around the clock, and of course also in German. Thousands of 5-star reviews on Trustpilot speak for themselves, as do over 38 million users. If you use the link in the description, you'll get 83% off and 4 months free. Additionally, if you're not satisfied, there's a 45-day money-back guarantee. What can Iran do to counter this? Well, it has a massive arsenal of air defense systems, which, as we have to clearly say, proved to be useless during the 12-day war. Back then, however, the big advantage for the Israelis was that they eliminated the Iranian headquarters and command posts and killed the officers responsible for them. That doesn't necessarily have to be as successful again, because Iran has naturally learned from it and will try to make sure that such a repeat is not possible. Iran has in all likelihood also acquired new systems, but we have to be clear here. That's hardly enough. It's unthinkable that they have acquired enough to fundamentally change anything here. This time, the United States will be involved from the very beginning, including with F-22s and B-2S, and a few additional Mikoyan Gorevich 29S from Russia won't help either, since Iran has received them. They won't have any impact on that. Individual shootdowns by Iran are still possible during a campaign lasting several weeks, but they won't generally prevent American air superiority. So Iran will have to rely on its other means. These include about 2,000 ballistic missiles, several thousand drones, and probably hundreds of small boats, which together with submarines and mini-submarines, as well as drones and missiles launched from the shore, can make traffic through the Strait of Hormuz more difficult. In addition, there are fears on the Israeli side that Hezbollah might get involved. It has now been significantly weakened and is no longer comparable to how it was, for example, 5 years ago, especially after the exchange of blows with the Israelis. But it would still distract Israel and threaten it in the north. So what would an attack against Iran look like? Once the attack is decided, the first step will be to reduce Iran's ability to defend itself before moving on to other targets. That means, at the beginning, the air defenses will be suppressed with suppression of enemy air defense and destruction of enemy air defense, which stands for suppression of enemy air defense and then destruction of enemy air defense. Will steps be taken to ensure that Iran's air defenses no longer play a role? It doesn't mean that every single system will be destroyed, but that the air defenses will no longer be able to prevent the operations of the Americans and the Israelis, even though, as I said, individual shootdowns cannot be completely ruled out. Then, in this context, of course, everything that flies will also be destroyed, whether it's on the ground or in the air. So every aircraft that is known will be destroyed on the ground. And if it manages to take off, it will be shot down. Once that has been achieved, the Americans' fourth-generation aircraft, like the F-15, F-16, and F-18, can operate relatively unimpeded over southern Iran. And above all, they can stay there for a long time, because they don't have stealth capabilities, which makes them much more vulnerable. But once the air defenses and the enemy air force have been suppressed, they can operate in the south for a long time. And that will be necessary to shoot down the Iranians' missiles before they are launched, because these will threaten the American bases just as much as the Israelis themselves. And the more of them you can destroy on the ground, the better, because then fewer can be fired at you, of course. Very quickly, there would also be an effort to target the missile stockpiles. Known storage sites and bases for attack drones would also likely be targeted, in order to reduce Iran's ability to harm the Americans and the Israelis as much as possible. If Iran shows signs of trying to block the Strait of Hormuz, the Navy and the Navy of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps would also be directly attacked in order to defeat them and minimize the impact on the oil trade as much as possible. Fighter jets in the southeast of the country would not only be looking for more launch vehicles for ballistic missiles, but of course also for launch vehicles for anti-ship missiles, which could then potentially fire at tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Decapitation strikes are also likely, if only to make a military response from Iran more difficult. Whether Trump wants to kill Khamenei, of course, can only be guessed. However, Israel will save itself, getting involved relatively early in these attacks, but not with full force. That's expected to keep reserves for the Houthis, Hezbollah, and potential attacks from Iran to fend them off. After the air defenses and the air force have been defeated and the shelling has been reduced, the focus will increasingly shift to infrastructure, such as nuclear facilities,
arms factories, and military installations. And a sustained elimination of as much as possible will then follow, in order to achieve a lasting weakening of Iran's ability to pose a threat again in the future, at least to some extent. You won't be able to destroy everything permanently from the air, but you can. Every research facility, every piece of infrastructure, every part involved in the production of the nuclear cycle, whether it's the missiles or anything else involved there, can of course be destroyed on the ground with targeted attacks. The big question will be, will there be a regime challenge? Trump might be able to bomb a regime challenge from the air alone, but not the one he wants. The killing of Khamenei and parts of the elite will likely lead to a coup by the Revolutionary Guards. They would then take over the country, and the regime would largely continue to exist. Maybe with a few cosmetic changes, but not a fundamental transformation, and certainly not an end to the oppression of the country itself. The suppression of the uprisings in January may have intimidated people, but of course it only intensified the hatred. Now, however, Iranians know that they are there, and when the attacks happen, they also know that the United States is ready to help them this time. That can, and probably will, fuel the uprisings at first. More than a year ago, and again, more than half a year ago, the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi spoke about 50,000 Iranian security forces being ready to defect. Of course, we can't really know how true that is, and how many of them will actually do it. At this point, we can only guess. We also can't guess whether there could be even more. That's also possible, of course, but we have to say, with United States troops on the ground, with United States forces on the ground, that would be the moment for everyone on the Iranian side who wants to get rid of the regime to say, now or never. This is the best chance we've ever had. Now we have to go all in. Going all in is what it is. But even if everything is put in, it's still no guarantee of success as long as the United States doesn't want to intervene on the ground. And we can assume that that's out of the question. We can assume that there are special operations on the ground, with American and Israeli special forces operating in specific locations, whether it's to eliminate individuals, destroy facilities, or possibly to help some insurgents. But the idea that there will be an invasion by conventional forces, occupying land and handing it over to some kind of opposition government, is simply out of the question. If we slowly come to a conclusion, the aircraft carrier strike group around the Gerald R. Ford isn't actually urgently needed near Israel. Of course, it can also attack Iran from there, but with additional effort. The distance is greater. That means more aerial refueling will be necessary. There will be more fatigue, more maintenance will be required, and fewer missions will be able to be flown, simply because the planes are in the air longer just to get to their area of operation. From there, of course, they can protect Israel well against drones and cruise missiles. However, there are now so many planes on the way there, and especially in Jordan, that it's questionable whether that will even be necessary. Meanwhile, on the western side of Iran, on this side, there are enough bases, and Israel is also there to cover this area. On the eastern flank, however, towards Pakistan, that's not the case, especially since the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have forbidden the use of their territory for attacks. The second aircraft carrier strike group would be better placed in the Indian Ocean or Gulf of Oman alongside the first one. So, moving them there would take about another week, which would be almost exactly 10 days before the ultimatum expires. And it's probably not a complete coincidence that Trump is talking about 10 days. From my perspective, it seems likely that the military told him, in 10 days, we'll be ready. If the aircraft carrier has been moved to the Indian Ocean, that is, I would actually assume that it will be moved there. So, what will happen? The most likely scenario is that Iran will not back down. A pro forma attack cannot be ruled out at this point. That's what I call it. So, if Trump wants to prove to the world that the red lines he has drawn actually mean something, that he carries out an attack just to carry out an attack, to prove it to the world, whoever crosses my red lines will be punished. But not a full military campaign that is meant to fundamentally change something. That can't be ruled out at the moment. But because of the military buildup, it's pretty unlikely. So Trump will probably not just carry out a one-time strike, like in Operation Midnight Hammer, but instead will start a military campaign against Iran that will last for weeks, in which Israel will participate. A third aircraft carrier strike group could also be added to this, centered around the George H.W. Bush. It is still training off the East Coast, and there are no reliable reports of deployment. It may be available in 4 to 6 weeks, and if the attacks last for weeks, then this aircraft carrier could be added at a later point, and then, for example, replace the Gerald A. Ford when it is withdrawn, or supplement it if more fighter jets are needed. The likely start of the attacks is probably not before next weekend. As I said, Trump has more or less everything he needs on site. The second aircraft carrier strike group arrives Sunday, but it makes sense for him to wait until the next weekend. Due to these circumstances, there was then time to move the second aircraft carrier strike group to a better location. The attacks are likely to happen beforehand because the regime is probably resuming large-scale civilian massacres. That after this build-up, he just watches as this happens and simply waits to attack a week later seems very unlikely. That means if the Iranians want to guarantee that the attacks begin this weekend, then they have to start shooting at these demonstrations, which are already being reported again at these here. That would probably be the best guarantee from the Iranian side that it will start this weekend. The attacks will likely cause major damage to the nuclear and missile program, but won't eliminate it permanently. As long as you have the technical skills and trained people, it will continue. A regime change is theoretically possible, but without a ground invasion, everything is there except a guarantee for it. If the attacks happen, if they target supporters of the government, can it continue as before? As I said, depending on whether there's a decapitation or not, with Khamenei or without him, with a coup by the Revolutionary Guards. But it could also lead to a civil war if parts of the military defect and other parts remain loyal. That would be a kind of civil war like in Syria, except this time the United States of America would have triggered it directly. And for the sake of completeness, there are also a few rumors going around at the moment. There are claims that in Iran, the destruction of their own residential areas is being planned and prepared, in order to then blame the United States of America and Israel, and to use images of dead children and women to generate international solidarity. I have absolutely no way to verify this, even in the slightest. But if this were to happen, then these rumors would have been correct in some way. So, let's take a look at it. The Americans are ready for the military strike. Iran will fight back and can cause damage, but it basically cannot change the outcome. The United States and the Israelis will likely flatten the nuclear and missile programs as much as possible, but they cannot force a regime change if the Iranian population, and especially parts of the Iranian military, do not want to participate. When I look back at successful changes of government, I don't see any. I can't remember any where significant parts of the armed forces didn't switch sides, or at least remained apathetic. If the population rises up, that is, without the uprising population receiving armed assistance, it won't happen if the government forces shoot at them. And if both sides are armed, then a civil war threatens. That means, even here, it could theoretically mean instability for months and years. So the situation is more than tense, and the outcome is anything but certain. If you want to stay updated on how things develop, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to make sure you're safe from American cruise missiles. Once again, thanks to CyberGhost for supporting us with this ad. If you also want to stay safe on the internet with a VPN, you can get 83% off plus 4 months free. And that's all from my side for now. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment if you have something to add. That's it from me for now. Thanks for watching and see you soon. Thanks also to the supporters on Patreon, as well as the members here on YouTube. In particular, I would like to thank Lieutenant Colonels Mahamuri and Thomas Comps, as well as Lieutenants Vision Sound Lab, Robert Viel, Matt Burke, Möter 1000 Bertainment, Janis Gu NTX, Sascha Müller, Cunningham European Union Stress, Jans vom Eck, Uwe Die Fremen, Nickname to Bib, Carsten Schulz, Gulasch Nascher 4000 and Tequila. 42. Thank you. This wouldn't have been possible without them.